But on Thursday, something came up, and Jane said we'd have to reschedule. A month later, I coincidentally had a meeting with the casting director for Jane's show. There's a great part we're casting for the last episode of this season. You'd be perfect. Can you stick around here, take a look at the script, and meet the producers at 2? I went in for the audition, and a few hours later, I received the call. I was hired. I was told to report to the studio the next day at 9 a.m. to begin a week of work. I was being paid more money than I'd ever made in my career. I called Jane and got her machine. I left a message saying I booked the job, I was thrilled, and I'd see her the next day. A few hours later, the casting director called me. Nancy, I'm so sorry. There's been a change. They've cut your part. You'll still be paid for the full week. Everyone feels so bad. I'm sorry. The casting director went on to say that the producers had assured her that they would cast me in another episode the following season. I tried to console myself with the promise of a future role. Later that week, I went out to dinner with my old friend Gabe, who had become a successful TV producer. After I told him the story, he shook his head. That doesn't make sense. Why'd they pay you so much when they didn't use you? Especially when they said that they'd bring you on next year. Gabe knew the producers of Jane's show. He said he'd see what he could find out. A few days later, he took me to lunch. She had you fired, he said. Who? I asked. Jane. She told them that she wouldn't work with you. What? Why? And they'll just do whatever she says? I mean, aren't they her bosses? Well, she's one of the stars of the show. Believe me, she gets whatever she wants. She wants someone fired, boom, they're gone. But I don't get it. Why? I thought you guys were close. Didn't she live with you? Did you have some kind of falling out or something? You mean there was no script change? I asked, struggling to make sense of it. Gabe shook his head. Nah, they had to recast. So then, there'll be no next season either? I started to cry. I was devastated. It sucks, I know, Gabe said, taking my hand. I'm real sorry. This business is, you know. What are you going to do? I called Jane and left messages. She didn't return my calls. I never spoke to her again. A few years ago, when Jane went through a nasty and very tabloidy divorce, her husband having left her for a younger woman, people would call me up all the time asking if I was experiencing a spectacular episode of Schadenfreude. The answer was no. Maybe it's natural for people to assume that her misfortunes would somehow be satisfying to me, but here is the truth. Whenever she comes up, I can only think of Jane as I knew her. A sweet, hopelessly insecure girl who yearned for her dad, wanted above all to make herself pretty, 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 and was willing to sacrifice pieces of herself to do so. She was someone I liked knowing, someone with whom I had a great deal in common, and at the same time, nothing at all. Nevertheless, we shared a period of time, had some fun, and helped each other just a little in the best way we knew how. She was someone I considered a true friend, and no matter how hard I try, I can just never, ever forget that. So when I think of Jane, I just feel sad. I once read an interview with Jane where she said that if her career hadn't worked out, she'd have been happy just serving people burgers at the joint she worked at all those years ago when she was shacking up with me. She said she got joy out of just giving people fries and milkshakes and getting tips. It felt honest to her, and somehow she felt as though she forged friendships with the customers that were very deep. I know what she meant. There are those connections you have with people that on the surface seem fleeting, ephemeral, inexplicable, but that you nonetheless feel certain are important and terribly profound and very real, until one day when you look back on it and you think to yourself, maybe not. Anyway, I would imagine that deep down Jane knows, as I do, that even if it were that simple, sometimes being a friend is just not enough. And that is one of the suckiest things in life.
Hollywood, you're just chasing rainbows and heartaches and lies. Girl, don't go out to Burbank. It's just full of cruelty and bad jokes and skanks.
They say that it's warm and it's sunny and it's crazy and funny, but babe, it's a desert, and deserts get real cold at night.